Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Timothy Harfield, Product Marketing Manager for Sage 100 Cloud in the US. Thank you for joining us for this crucial conversation about digital transformation. So last month, I sat down with Laurie McCabe, co-founder and partner at SMB Group, to understand what transformation is all about. We worked on identifying some specific factors that small and medium-sized businesses need to consider in order to survive and thrive in a constantly changing world. And to recap, specific recommendations we made at that time included recognizing that failure to adapt will have future costs, that going digital comes at a cost, but that cost may pale in comparison to the cost of not investing. We also talked about the need to focus on agility, that businesses need to make sure that the investments that they make are customizable and connected to ensure that they're able to take advantage of future innovations as they emerge. We've talked about digital transformation and the fact that it is as much about changing culture as it is about changing technologies. The technologies purchased is not the same thing as a technology used. We're not talking about rotisserie ovens here, of course. You can't just set it and forget it. We also talked about focusing on specific goals and tackling one at a time. You don't, of course, need to do everything at once. Digital transformation isn't something that happens overnight, and that's okay. What's important, however, is that you do start your journey. And lastly, we focused on starting with the data, how we're increasingly data rich, but information poor. If you don't know how your business is doing, how your customers are reacting, what your competition is up to, it's impossible to be agile. But in that first webinar, we really spoke at a pretty high level. If you did miss it, I suggest that you go back and listen to it on demand. But today we're going to dig a little bit deeper, specifically into the theme of digital transformation as it pertains to ERP software specifically. So before moving on, a few housekeeping items and reminders. So first of all, although we will not pause for questions during the presentation, we are going to leave time for questions at the end. Please type your questions as we go, and we look forward to discussing them in a little bit. And I do encourage you to provide your questions. And secondly, if you are not able to stay through to the end of today's webinar and would like to review or share content from it later, don't fret. We will send out a link so you can watch it asynchronously and share it within your organization after the fact. So who are we and why should you care about what we have to say? So as I mentioned at the outset, my name is Timothy Harfield and I run product marketing for Sage 100 Cloud in the US. Prior to joining Sage, I've worked variously in educational technology as a data scientist and as a university professor. In 2017, I published a book called The Occasions of Community, Jean-Baptiste Vico, and the Concept of Society, in which I describe, among other things, how changes in information technology have historically shaped how we think about ourselves and our place in the social world. Today, I'm delighted also to be joined by Cindy Jutras. Cindy is president and founder of Mint Jutras, an independent research and advisory firm that specializes in analyzing the business impact of enterprise applications. She's widely recognized expert in analyzing the impact of enterprise applications on business performance. With over 40 years of corporate experience and specific expertise in manufacturing, supply chain, customer service, and business performance management, Cindy has spent the last 13 years benchmarking and the performance of software solutions in the context of the business benefits of technology. So thank you so much for joining me today, Cindy.
Thanks a lot, Tim and Timothy, and welcome everyone. So let's dive right into our agenda today. As Timothy mentioned, there's a lot of different aspects to digital transformation. Today, we're going to talk about it in the context of the enterprise software that you use to run your business. We'll explore a little how well prepared or not different companies are in terms of getting digital, and we define that in terms of the tasks and the activities, as well as the system of record of the business. And we'll diverge a little into other kinds of supporting digital technologies and really explore what the real and perceived value of those technologies are. We'll have time for some parting thoughts and also hopefully for some question and answer. But right now, let's get right to it. So in the last webinar, Timothy and Laurie really talked at length about what digital transformation is, what's driving it, particularly from the perspective of the small to medium-sized business. And they shared some things about getting started. But I have to observe that in talking about digital transformation, because it's been hyped so much, that in many ways people assume we're all talking about the same thing, when in fact that's hardly the case. Today we're going to talk about it in the context of ERP, or as I might say, the enterprise that runs your business. Before we even begin, I know there's been lots of talk about killing off ERP, and ERP is no longer relevant. Let me just say that ERP is a convenient label. The way I define ERP in my research is as the integrated suite of modules that provides the operational and transactional system of record of your business. So defining it that way, it can't die, it can't go away. You need it. In my mind, one very simple definition of digital transformation is that it's finally delivering on the original promise of ERP. And that was for a full end-to-end solution, fully integrated, that streamlined and automated your business processes. Now, did early ERP deliver on that? The short answer is no, and partly because it couldn't. It didn't have the level of modern technology that we have today in order to deliver on that promise. Now, obviously, one of the first elements of digital transformation, or the digital economy in general, is transacting digitally. We're talking about full end-to-end processes here, like maybe not even order, but quote to cash, like procure to pay. Those are very transaction-centric kinds of processes. And those are influenced today by new ways of doing business, new ways of selling, like e-commerce and like these online marketplaces. So obviously we have some impact there, and that also has an impact on the software that you're using to run your business. But quite frankly, that's just the first step. Beyond that, you need to add a new level of intelligence in order to fully participate in the global digital economy, and that requires a certain level of connectivity. You're not talking about doing business with people down the street anymore. This global digital economy is just that. It's global, and it should be connected digitally to make it easier to connect. Quite frankly, the internet levels the playing field. It used to be just large companies that could operate on a global basis, that could establish a global presence. But in that internet leveling that playing field, even SMBs, small to mid-sized businesses, can actually establish a global presence. And that brings unprecedented levels of opportunity, both from just the sheer concept of new middle classes being emerging, as well as expanding your own horizons from a buying and a selling perspective. But I'll caution you, with that level of opportunity comes new challenges. So be careful what you wish for. The systems, the applications, the software that you've used to get you to the point you are at today may not carry you into that future.
So what I really like about what you said here, Cindy, is the fact that you've observed the fact that digital transformation is something that is very frequently hyped. That as something that is hype-ridden, it can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. And you've been very clear to articulate what, in actual fact, we're talking about digital transformation with within this particular conversation. When we look at the term digital conversation, we said it was only first used significantly as recently as 2011. And even at that time, it was used to really describe three different things. Digital transformation is something that is happening out there, something that we have to respond to as digital technologies are adopted and have impacts on how consumers and businesses do business, and that in turn has an impact on how businesses do business with those businesses, if that makes any sense. It is also something that refers to a kind of set of cultures or practices, the ways in which organizations themselves have to change to adapt to changing social conditions. And lastly, since the very beginning, it refers to the technologies themselves. And of course, as pressures change and as competitors adopt digital technologies, that creates opportunity, but also an urgent need for businesses to compete, to adopt technologies to supplement or complement the strategies that they're adopting in the face of a digitally transforming world.
You're right, Timothy, and that leads us to another question. You've presented a lot of different factors here, so the real question is, how well prepared are companies today for this global digital economy? And that's actually a question we asked in our 2006 Enterprise Solution Study. Now, before I explain this, before I go on, I should just step back a moment and introduce you to the concept of my enterprise solution studies. Mint Jutras does a comprehensive study which is survey-based every year. Today, I'm going to share some data with you from 3 of those studies, partly because some questions I ask every year so I can get a year-over-year kind of perspective. Sometimes I add something new, take something out to make room for that new. So really, we set the stage here for this question we asked back a few years ago, and that was, how well prepared are you? Now, if you look at this data, you can see that a little less than, and oh, by the way, I know Timothy has been talking about small to medium-sized businesses. I should point out that these surveys, and it's all electronic surveys, the 3 that I'm using here today had anywhere from about 450 to this 525 responses. So it's not an insignificant amount of data, but it's also from companies across a whole range of size of companies, from very small to very large, in a sampling of a whole broad select group of industries, from manufacturing and distribution and service and nonprofits and government entities, you name it, we included them in the survey. So we've got a very broad perspective here. Now, looking at this chart, and these are the answers to this question, you can see that a little less than half are in the early stages of preparation, either not prepared at all, just beginning, or they've made some progress, but they still have a long way to go. Now that leaves more than half, 58%, that are saying, we're getting close, or bring it on, we're very well prepared. Now, you might say, is that a little bit optimistic? Well, my reaction was, really? This is a subjective kind of question. And I realize that it's, people are subjective in answering it, and they may feel very well prepared, but I anticipated this would be the case. So I planted a few other questions in there that forced them into a more objective view. The first of those were, to what extent are these activities performed and managed digitally? So, in this case, we don't have all the different activities that might be in an organization, but we've got a good sampling, starting with financial planning and budgeting. Some of the other planning functions like demand planning, sales and operation, you can read them. Some activities like sales opportunity and pipeline management, product design, engineering, etc. Now, across the top, they rated themselves in terms of that extent to which they were digital. Completely digital means that exactly what it says. All of this is done with the help of digitally transformed applications that keep them out of spreadsheets, keep them out of paper and manual processes. As you can see, it's a fairly small percentage that claim to be completely digital. Some where they have some digital capabilities, but they have to supplement them with spreadsheets. That's probably the biggest percentage here. We've still got way too many that are using spreadsheets as their primary tool. And God forbid, we've still got 8 to 18% that are relying on paper and manual processes. This
Are we?
us to
Are we?
conclude that spreadsheets still play a role in about 80% or worse. Timothy, I think you had a question.
Yeah. So, two questions actually. So the first question is, you do have a broad sample here. Um, do you do you see any sort of systematic differences between responses based on on sort of business size? And where that gets interesting is, do you see any kind of digital divide emerging? And then the second question I have here is, are we seeing a kind of Dunning-Kruger effect, right? Where people think that they're far more prepared than they are as a function of the fact that they're not necessarily clear on what it means to actually go fully digital.
Well, I think there's a couple of factors here. I think the divide isn't necessarily by company size. However, some of these solutions that you might use have in the past only been really geared towards very large companies. But I have to say that a lot of this capability is coming down market, and more SMBs do have more available technology than they ever had before. Now, are they taking advantage of it? Not so much, as you can see. But really the divide is in the haves and the have-nots. Those that are embracing this digital transformation and investing in technologies are widening the gap between those who have not. Now, this was only one of the two ways that I measure how truly digitally prepared they are. The other was the operational and transactional system of record. Now, remember how I defined ERP to begin with. It was the integrated suite of modules that provides the operational and transactional system of record in your business. So actually having these kinds of transactions in ERP gives you some level of digital associated with it. If it's the creation of those transactions, whether customer orders, purchase orders, contracts, payments, etc., if they're created automatically, if they come into your system digitally, then I would call that complete digital. The only human interaction is with approvals and exceptions. However, in this case, 20, 25, 28%, some 34% are digitally recorded, but it requires manual data entry. And you can see still the biggest numbers in the columns are paper, a little digital. You might get a purchase order in from your vendor and you have to manually enter it, but the backup to that isn't a digital record. The backup to that is a paper record. And then, I cringe at the thought of people still relying on paper and manual processes for all of this. The bottom line, what we can gather from this is there is still a lot of manual data entry and there's still a lot of paper involved. And oh, by the way, I should diverge and I should say, if you get I didn't mean to go forward. If you get a PDF of a document by email, don't think that's completely digital. Yes, it's stored on a computer, but it still requires some transformation and some data entry. If you have a program, an application that can take that PDF and do optical character recognition or something like that and transform it into that digital system of record that's in your ERP, then you're completely digital. But if there's some other steps involved, then it's not.
And this is baffling. But we see it time and time again. We recently did research ourselves at Sage, focused on large businesses that are bringing between 30 million and $1 billion. And again, over 50% of those companies surveyed, distributors and manufacturers, are still heavily reliant on non-digital means of data of conducting their businesses, and reliance on spreadsheets, and not just a spreadsheet, right? When we're talking about spreadsheets, we're talking about multiple spreadsheets to manage their business. And the reason why this is baffling is not only because we have all this other technology available to us, but the fact that it introduces significant inefficiency, and that amount of inefficiency increases exponentially as a business grows and increases in complexity. But it's not just an inefficiency, right? It introduces error. Every time a human being touches a piece of data, that data becomes increasingly put at risk. And so as a business grows and works with more data, and that data is being touched constantly by human hands, huge risk of error, and that risk of error in turn puts the business at risk.
Yep, absolutely. I would say that risk factor is the most important here. Now, one of the things our audience, Timothy, might be thinking here is, this data is from 2016. Haven't we come a long way in the last 3 years? And I would say, if you were thinking of that, good question. So let's fast forward to some data that we collected in our latest study, the 2019 Enterprise Solution Study. And we're going to start with a question about sentiments about digital technologies. So, result of that, 75% agree that digital technologies have the potential of fundamentally changing the way we do business. 2/3, 67%, agree that embracing them is necessary for survival. And just a little less, 63%, see them as a competitive advantage. So, with all of this perception, this might lead you to believe that the majority in the past 3 years have taken a wild leap forward and invested in them. So let's take a look at some data that was collected just prior to when we asked that question that I just showed you. Just prior to that question, we asked what level of investment the participants had made in these different kinds of digital technologies. And this is a wide range of them, not all of which will pertain to every single company. So for example, digital twins and beacons might be more relevant to manufacturers. Drones might be most relevant to those doing field service out in big oil fields or power lines. But as you can see, the first column, those that had invested, is still very small percentages. Now, we've got a few more that are planning to invest in 1 year or long term. Those that are actively considering are thinking maybe, but they haven't decided yet to invest. So where are the biggest numbers still? No plans, no activities. So the answer is yes, people think these are important, but as of the start of this year, they certainly hadn't yet invested.
So thinking about the slide that you just presented, right, prior to this, and now looking here, on the slide prior, you observed that 2/3 of those you surveyed said that digital technologies were necessary to their survival. And here, we're seeing that the rate of adoption of these particular digital technologies is incredibly low. So there seems to be a significant disconnect here. What are the digital technologies that businesses think are necessary to their survival if they're not these?
I think the answer to that, Timothy, lies in another part of that sentiment question that we kind of snuck in. It was a little bit of an outlier. We asked them to agree or neutral or disagree with the statement, we don't know where to begin to digitally transform our business. So 21% agree they simply don't know where to begin. I suspect that the 39% that were neutral on this were just afraid to admit that. Maybe they had some idea, but didn't really know how to proceed. Because let's face it, this is a little bit different than the other statements they were asked to agree or disagree with. You either know or you don't know where to begin. So only 40% disagreed with this statement, which flipped on its side means 40% really know where to begin. I would say that means many don't know what they don't know. And if they don't know, they won't go looking for answers unless they perceive value in doing so. Therefore, that led us to this next question here. And we asked, what was the perceived value of these different technologies, very similar to the ones that you saw where we asked what levels of investment. Now, as I mentioned, not all of these will pertain to all different companies. And in fact, some of them aren't even all that new. I would argue that 3D printing, the Internet of Things, those types of things have been around for a while. But more and more companies are perceiving some value in these technologies, but about the same percentage are still unsure of that value. They're still essentially saying, show me. Now, of course, there's some that still perceive little or no value, and some that admit they don't know.
So what's missing here is ERP, right? So on the one hand, we have businesses that strongly believe that digital transformation is essential to their not just business, but their survival. You also have those same businesses claiming that, in the vast majority of cases, they're relying heavily on spreadsheets, so they do not have an ERP. And then we have those same businesses looking forward to these things like blockchain, Internet of Things, predictive analytics, cognitive analytics, and being uncertain about those values. Is ERP an important first step to get from where they are today with spreadsheets to where they need to be in the future in the adoption of these more advanced and sophisticated technologies?
Well, I think the answer to that is, I would say ERP has always been important to get them even functioning, whether they're functioning well or not. What's important moving forward is that ERP is technology enabled. Now, you notice the very bottom, artificial intelligence is shaded differently. That was actually intentional. Artificial intelligence is an example of how you enable these kinds of enterprise applications like ERP that work in conjunction with some of these other technologies. You need AI to power smart robots. AI is what makes any old robot a smart robot. AI is an integral component of these digital assistants that you can talk to today, because natural language processing is an element of artificial intelligence. AI is what makes predictive analytics predictive, cognitive analytics cognitive. So I would argue that even though 12% say they don't know, or 23% say there's little or no value, I would say that AI is already a part of our daily lives, whether we want to recognize and admit it or not. So let's take a look at how that happened. Nobody came to Apple and said, I'm not going to buy an iPhone unless I can talk to it. But they perceive value in that. So, iPhones just started coming out with Siri embedded within them. Now, there's a couple of aspects of that make it relevant here. One is it wasn't optional. You notice I didn't say it was for free, because you're paying for every last feature in that iPhone or any other device. But it caught on because people perceived some value. It delivered some value to them. And therefore, other device manufacturers followed suit. And I would argue that some millennials can't live without it. Us baby boomers probably can, particularly ones like me who are hard of hearing that prefer to see an answer than listen to it. But I think I'm in the real small minority there. So really, that's the two key reasons why these digital assistants became mainstream within consumer technology. The bottom line is, for this kind of technology to be mainstream in enterprise applications like ERP, one, they need to be embedded, and two, they need to add value.
So this causes me stress, Cindy. It causes me lots of stress because I'm a small business owner and I'm running my business using some sort of lightweight accounting software and a bunch of spreadsheets. And now I'm feeling a lot of pressure to invest in artificial intelligence. As I mentioned at the outset, right, I've worked as a data scientist, and I've worked in higher education, developing fairly sophisticated software and algorithms to identify students who are at risk of dropping out, so that we could reach out with them, intervene, and ensure that they stayed and were retained through to the end of their degree. In working with these universities, what we found is that universities, just like businesses, feel a tremendous amount of stress to invest in some really sophisticated technologies, predictive analytics, cognitive analytics being two really big examples. But there's also such thing as readiness and maturity. And what would happen is, it seems really easy to just buy a predictive analytics solution, right? You can buy it off the shelf, and the promise of that is that it's going to overnight increase your success. But what they don't tell you, what vendors, and I've been a vendor in this space as well, right? Fortunately, I want to think a fairly upfront and honest vendor, right? But what a lot of people don't tell you is the fact that you need to put a lot of work in to your existing infrastructure and to the ways in which you're collecting and integrating existing data sources in order to see the value of predictive analytics. And what we found working with universities, that in many times the kind of most important results that a university would see was not through the investment in predictive analytics, but was through the investment in ERP, and as a result of that ERP, having all of their data in one place, stored as a single source of truth, because only once you have that integrated solution, all of your data being collected into one place, can you then layer on predictive analytics. And to use the example of a university, right, just using reports using being created out of that single source of truth could yield upwards of 10-15% increase in student retention, whereas adding predictive analytics on top of that would sure see an improvement, but that improvement was more like 3%. If you layered predictive analytics onto an institution that did not already have that essential infrastructure in place, that ERP, that data warehouse, then that university would inevitably not be nearly as successful as the other others who would put in that hard work from the outset. So AI, absolutely the future. These types of innovations, blockchain, everything that you mentioned on the slide before, absolutely essential. It's where we're going, and they're increasingly producing the kind of digital divides that we're talking about. But you can't jump from spreadsheets to those overnight. You need to start somewhere, and that somewhere has to be with ERP, and it doesn't put you back. It does not put you back. There's a lot of stress out there that if people don't invest in AI tomorrow, they're going to fall back with respect to their competition, not realizing that because they've not put in that hard work, that ERP work at the beginning, that it ends up being a lot of wasted effort.
And I think that's the key. You know, many of the small businesses on this call may in fact have invested in ERP, but remember what I started out with digital transformation was delivering on the original promise of ERP, because that original promise was left unfulfilled in a lot of older and legacy solutions. So the key is you have to get into that situation that you described, Timothy, in terms of having a full view of your organization, be able to use the data. And I would say that you know, in trying to leave you folks with some parting thoughts, is if your current solution isn't meeting those needs, what I would say the first thing you do is have to develop a sense of urgency. Because while a lot of people feel stress, they may not feel the urgency to do something about it. Now, before I tell you how I think that relates to ERP, first let me tell you why I think that you need to develop this sense of urgency, because if you're feeling stress now, then I think that stress is only going to be compounded. One of the questions we asked of our survey respondents was, how much risk do you face in your industry being disrupted? As you can see, 90% feel there's some risk. However, 84% of that think it's low to medium. If you would, as a listener today, would have answered the question the same way, yes, there's risk out there, it's low to medium, you know, I would point to the examples we used in answering this question, like Uber disrupting the taxi industry, Airbnb disrupting hospitality, Netflix disrupting the entertainment industry. How do you think the taxi industry would have answered this question on the eve of the launch of Uber? My guess is they didn't feel much risk at all about a whole new business model. disrupting an industry like moving a person from one place to the other and collecting a fare for it. And yet we see that it was enormously disrupted, and that disruption did not take a long time. If you compare it to disruptions in the past, like digital photography, like the personal computer, those took almost a decade to put companies out of business or force them to completely change their businesses. These examples today, compared to those, happened virtually overnight. So let me relate that, all of what I've been saying, back to ERP. Many of you are running solutions that don't have a prayer of being digitally transformed. And a lot of you are basically treating the replacement of your current solutions, whether it's a full ERP or something that's supplemented with spreadsheets or somewhere in between, you're treating it like brain surgery. If it's not broke, don't fix it. If the patient isn't dying, don't do it. I would say that I would encourage you to look at it a little differently, because if you do wait until the patient is dying, is that the time you want to be implementing a new ERP solution when your business is in distress? I would say look at it more like joint replacement. When to replace a joint, a bum knee or a bum hip? A, when it becomes too painful, and or when you can't do what you want or need to do, when you can't function well, when you can't function properly. To me, why not apply those same criteria to your business and to ERP? And in which case, those old legacy solutions, you may be able to surround them with newer technology, but will they give you the level of visibility that Timothy talked about when he talked about those universities? No, they can't. They don't have the underlying foundational technology that's going to give you the kind of visibility and connectivity that you need. So let me just finish up by a call to action. A lot of these technologies we've been talking about are still nascent. They haven't yet matured, nor have they caught on, but they will, just like Siri and her equivalents have in the world of consumer technology. So there's still time to prepare, but now is the time to prepare. So what is the call to action? Recognize that digital transformation is a journey. As Timothy and Laurie talked about last time, it doesn't happen overnight. Look carefully at your existing solutions and evaluate them in terms of their ability to support you now, as well as their agility. Will they enable you to transform your business, or will they be the reasons you can't? Will they put obstacles in your way? Wherever you are now, you won't transform overnight. Now, some of you will attack this aggressively. Others will be more cautious. If your solutions today are based on old, outdated technology, if they're what the world likes to call legacy systems, your foundation isn't strong. It simply won't support the kind of technology and the kind of technical revolution that we're in the midst of today. And it's that modern foundation, the technology, that's going to enable you, enable the change in the people, the change in the culture, the change in the processes. Technology isn't everything. And that's why just purchasing a new solution brings no guarantees of a successful transformation. Success is always a combination of technology, people, and processes. With that, I'm going to hand it back to you, Timothy.
I love what you've just said there, and the way in which it connects back to the way that you you opened up our discussion today. The fact that what we need to do, so ERP can be super scary, right? Because the notion of ERP ends up bringing to mind these massive systems that are very, yes, integrated, but they're also isolated. And when you have a large scale, integrated but isolated solution, it makes it very, very difficult to be agile. Whereas the modern ERP like Sage 100 Cloud, for example, are nimble by virtue of the fact that they have a hub. They work as a hub that is customizable and connected to a wide variety of additional cloud connected solutions. So what you end up with is a single source of truth that renders your business agile as technologies change, so that you have consistency within your business in terms of the processes that you've developed. You don't have to rip and replace not just your technology, but your processes. You can maintain those while at the same time being agile in the face of changing technologies by adopting third-party and other cloud-connected solutions as you grow and as the social world changes. So important. So thank you, Cindy. We do have a couple of questions and we have a little bit of time remaining, so I'm going to pick a few. So one question, and it goes back to this question of the difference between a small or medium-sized business and large enterprise. A lot of small and medium-sized businesses that we talk to at Sage and that we hear about they feel like they're at a disadvantage, that there is a digital divide and it's between them and larger businesses. But I wonder if there aren't some advantages, especially when we talk about agility, right? Advantages to being a smaller, medium-sized business compared to a larger business that they may be competing with.
I think there are some advantages that are advantages today that may not have always been the case. Those large companies that have truly embarked on digital transformations have large staffs. They tend to want to grow their own. They have their own data scientists, they have their own developers, their own technologists, and they're diving in. Now, an SMB can't do that. They just don't have the resources or the deep pockets to do that. And when all these digital capabilities require that level of investment, it kind of shut the SMB out. However, if you go back to my example about Siri and why Siri was so successful, it not only provided value, but it was embedded. And that's the key today. We're seeing more and more of these technology vendors, including ERP vendors, actually embedding these foundational digital technologies into their solutions. They're embedding analytics, they're embedding artificial intelligence. And as they do that, then the SMB has an advantage because the SMB is less likely to hold on to those old systems because they've devoted years and millions of dollars into developing them, customizing them, and they're so deeply ingrained in those organizations that it's almost impossible to rip them out. An SMB should be, just by definition of an SMB, more willing to move on to the next best solution, and that next best solution today has more and more of these technologies embedded within them. So I think in some ways they're behind because they haven't been able to get a jump start. But sometimes procrastination works in the long run because that gives the vendors time to actually embed these technologies and functions within the applications. And now we're seeing solutions on the market that are more nimble, more agile, and more technology enabled and affordable to the SMB.
Absolutely. So similar to Siri, Sage has Peg, right? Which is one of those integrated AI solutions that you were discussing, but also from the perspective of just modularity, being able to easily add on and take advantage of more advanced analytics capabilities. We have, of course, Sage Alerts and Workflow, right, which allows a customer to use the data that they already have to generate alerts and triggers to allow them to be agile in response to changing conditions in their inventory, changing customer demands, changing prices, all that other stuff, which is, up until recently was fairly out of reach or very manual in order to do. Also, Sage Inventory Advisor, right, to optimize your inventory using some fairly sophisticated predictive analytics. Again, predictive analytics that up until recently would have required a full staff of data scientists, but now, to just buy a solution off the shelf that is fully integrated with your ERP. So that modularity ends up being really helpful. And again, is something that an SMB is able to very easily take advantage of in a way that a large scale enterprise might not be able to. Closing question. So something that I am really interested in and passionate about is just the recognition that the success of a particular business in the adoption of the technology sure has to do with the technology. It's a necessary condition of success, but not every business that buys a piece of software is going to be successful, right? It has to do with these people, the culture, the processes, and it's a combination of those two things that renders a business successful, however they define that. Now, in your experience, your vast experience working with companies of a widely different sizes, right? Can you sort of mention any specific adoption strategies that you've seen that have been effective?
I think to start to answer that question, Timothy, let me tell you what is not successful, and that is don't boil the ocean. Well, don't try to boil the ocean because you can't. So look for small steps that you can take that add significant value. I would say the ones that are going to add the most value to you immediately are where you can automate or simplify the interaction with the system. It's interesting because almost every enterprise application vendor I know and deal with today has spent a lot of time working on user interfaces because the consumer technology has set a new bar for that in terms of what's easy to use and intuitive, and they've spent a lot of time on that. But in many ways, the best user interface is no user interface at all, and that is how you automate the collection of these transactions. Whether it's through EDI or e-commerce types of connections, whether it is connectivity directly with suppliers and customers, whether it is simple things that clutter up our everyday lives like travel expense reporting. If you can simplify and automate those tasks that tend to produce productivity leakages, if you can start to plug those leaks and get people on track to doing the value added kind of knowledge worker job that you're paying them to do, that's going to give you some big steps forward quickly. So look for that. In many ways, it's really looking for low-hanging fruit. Look for those simple steps to automate or simplify, apply the technology to do that, and then move on to the next one. Don't stop there because, I don't want you to boil the ocean, but I do want you to successfully look at different successive means of added efficiency and added productivity as you move forward.
It's so easy, right? If you're a business in an industry that could see disruption. We know that this is an anxiety, let's call it a sense of dread, right, that many businesses have. At the same time as you're looking at your competition, you're looking at others adopting some fairly sophisticated technologies, or at least talking about it. You're like blockchain, drones, all kinds of different sort of artificial intelligence analytics. It can be so easy to freak out and either put your head in the sand, right, on the one hand, or try to boil the ocean and just buy all the things. And we know that neither of those two solutions work. And the biggest reason why the latter doesn't work, right, just buying all the things and hoping it works, is the fact that it does put a significant stress on your culture, not to mention your back pocket, right? So by focusing on one thing, that low-hanging fruit, that one investment in automation, in increased efficiency, and demonstrating not only that it's making an impact for your business, but actually making a significant impact in the lives of your employees, that sure does make a significant impact in terms of your ability to implement future solutions and innovate further in a way that, you know, it's the tortoise and the hare, right? One thing at a time, slowly but surely. It might seem like slow, but in the long run, you can progress very, very rapidly and do the right thing for your business as a result. Thank you. Oh, go ahead.
And you bring up one good point in terms of changing the lives of your employees as well, and that don't underestimate the impact that has, because you know, I don't have numbers, but I'm sure other people do, in terms of the cost of replacing a productive employee. It's huge. So some of the benefits that you'll gain from improving the lives of the employees by giving them the proper tools to help them do their jobs can be worth its weight in gold in terms of payback, even though it's somewhat of a hidden cost.
I'm speechless. I couldn't agree more, right? We talk about digital transformation, and it's very easy to reduce the concept of digital transformation to the technology, to the things. But at the end of the day, we are only in business because of people. We're only in business for people. And our investments in the digital is only to make the lives of our employees and the lives of the people that we serve better. So that's a fantastic place to end. Thank you so much, Cindy, for joining us today. This has been, I think, a great conversation. Thank you to all of you for joining as well. Please do go back and listen to that first webinar if you've not listened to it already, and make sure to sign up and join us for the next in our series of webinars on digital transformation. Have a great day.